Hi, I'm Major General Jim Poss, U.S. Air Force retired, here with you with Inside Unmanned Systems magazine, and this is my first interview for the day, and it's a pretty big one that I'm pretty proud to bring to you. I've got Brit Wanick from uAvionix. He's the VP for marketing, and he's going to tell us about the wonderful stuff that uAvionix is doing. Brit, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I've known you guys for a long time. You're kind of world famous in the drone world. But you're world famous for stuff that I don't think you're going to talk about today. I mean, I know uAvionix is the world's best retrofit ADS-B company. I mean, you got this fantastic thing that you take one of the navigation lights out of your Cessna and you put it in, and an ADS-B in there, and magic happens, and you're compliant with the ADS-B mandate. Right. And then I'm Air Force, and I wrote an article on you guys about these really small Mode 5 IFF transponders in there. And I'm going to admit, I thought that's all you did. That's apparently not true. Can you correct me?
Yeah, there's quite a bit, and certainly we made a name for ourselves with the ADS mandate and being able to provide those products.
Okay. So I was right about that part.
You got that one nailed,
right,
and we're still doing that, and it's a great part of our business. And we have some displays that go in the cockpit as well, and then in the uncrewed space, essentially we do some work with defense, and that transponder you talk about is something that we provide for commercial uses as well. But we go well beyond that, and we have other things that do essentially command and control for drones. Right?
Okay. So data links.
Yeah. So data links. Exactly. Okay. So data links that allow you to communicate with the aircraft and control it. And there's some autopilots that go along with that, as well as GPS.
You guys make autopilots?
Well, yeah, we do. We make autopilots as well. Right. So there you go.
Probably do more research before I do these things. But all right.
And we've got some GPS, obviously. You kind of want to know where you are if you're going to control the aircraft itself. And then we've got ground control stations that go with the airborne radios, so that you have a full suite of products.
Oh, wow.
We actually call that Skyline.
All right, I'll be reading your website next time. So.
That's all good.
All right, so let me, you said a lot of stuff that we really haven't talked about before, and I'm going to pick on one of my favorite things in drones. When I was in the Air Force, I always had this saying, it's the data link stupid. Yeah. Because, we would have these guys that would come in about what we wanted to do with drones and where we were going to attack this target. Every conversation boiled down to whether or not we could get a solid data link with that aircraft or not. And I argue that is the key difference until we get full autonomy between a drone and a manned aircraft. You've got to have a rock solid command and control link. So what is your approach to C2?
Well, we really look at it from what we call path diversity and frequency diversity perspective, right? So we believe that you have to multiple links to the aircraft, and we do that through ISM, which is pretty standard way of communicating with RC or remote control aircraft, if you will. We've carried that forward. There's also protected aviation C-band, essentially. We have that. We have LTE, and more recently we're bringing on board satellite-based communications as well. So all four of those, essentially through one device on the aircraft, or two devices if you have multiples there, provide you an assured level of connectivity. And so no matter what the conditions are, no matter where you fly, whether it's near urban areas or out over the mountains, you know that you have assured communication and control of that aircraft.
Okay, now when you say you've got multiple pathways, I mean, do I have to pick one? Do I have to LTE, or have to pick SATCOM, or how does that work?
No, you get to choose essentially the multi-link, what we call it, which ones you want. So you want ISM and LTE, or ISM, LTE, and SATCOM. You get to make some choices when you configure your aircraft based on the missions that you're going to be flying. Okay. But then the software in the Skyline system, which is a cloud-based command and control network, it's going to be making the decision for you while the aircraft is flying. So you as the operator get to see what's happening. You can see how the links are responding and what's the strongest one. But all parts that are in the software make sure that the link stays consistent with the aircraft.
So you're making me nervous. So so you've got this thing in the cloud that's making decisions for you, and I agree it's going to make better decisions than certainly I would. But are you losing income mode and then picking it up another? And I mean, isn't that a big risk?
Yeah,
that you're going to drop
great question. Yeah, great question. So it's set up where there's actually two radios in one on the aircraft. So we always do a make before break. And so while the system's looking at the signal strength and the interference with each one of the paths and each one of the frequencies, it's making a decision saying, all right, I'm going to move to this new, better signal, and it makes sure that it has that connectivity in place before it breaks off the last one.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, all right. So that sounds like a great mitigation for that.
Yeah.
How do you get this past the FAA? Because I mean, you just listed about a million things I could see them getting involved in.
Yeah, there's a lot. You know, part of our pedigree and what we've been able to do on the crewed aviation side, we talked about earlier with ADSB, right? We understand what it means to bring aviation-grade avionics into the space. And so we've gone through and we've essentially certified certain products. The Ping 200X is an example of that, where we've taken it through a TSO process to make sure. So that's kind of the first start, right, is that we've gone through the compliance mechanisms within the FAA to really know what they need to have assurance in the communications devices. And then you go out and you build your safety case, right? And it includes not just the hardware, but the software, and you make sure that that's certified when needed to be able to then present to the FAA and say, hey, this is how we're going to meet the requirements here, and be able to obtain a waiver for flight.
Okay, so we're in kind of a no man's land when it comes to, you know, standards and whether there is or isn't going to be a TSO certification for this. You know, we've got ASTM standards. We don't know what the FAA standards are going to be. I mean, how do you cover all those bases? So if I buy your product and the new rules come out, Part 108, this is what they're calling it, that I'm going to be able to use it.
Yeah, so you know, the basis from our perspective is we may not type certify an aircraft, right?
No one knows.
Yeah, no one really knows. But we do think strongly that you should be able to apply standards to the aviation or to the communication links that you have, right? So by providing kind of certified products and software following DO 377, et cetera, you can build essentially a tech stack that is certifiable, right? And then you can deploy that tech stack in a variety of different ways, independent of the airframe. And that allows you to move down this path of getting to a steady stream of waivers, if you will, operating in this mode where it's an exception to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight. And you may have different missions that require, you know, adding or subtracting certain elements, but you at least have the basis from the beginning of certifying.
Okay, I'm going to get back to my prejudice about uAvionix, because I first met you guys when I was on the Remote Identification Aviation Rulemaking Committee 50 years ago, and I know that you were very involved in the Aviation Rulemaking Committee and the ASTM Committee. Do you have that same level of dedication for C2? I mean, are you in there fighting in the trenches for the standards?
Yeah, we are essentially working daily on that, right? We follow the RTCA standards and how we develop things and how we bring them through the process. And, you know, we know that when you look back at what's worked in aviation in general, it's because those standards existed around communication. And you see that in piloted aircraft today. So being able to pull that forward into what we're doing from a drone operations perspective is a key tenet that we're trying to hold to as a company.
Okay, all right. So you're clearly working well on the paperwork wars for all the standards and all that stuff. I'm assuming this works from the lab. Do you have real hard data in the real world that this works?
We do. That's good. Yeah. So we've actually been working with both North Dakota, the test site there, as well as the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma.
Equally great group of people.
Yeah. Okay. And Choctaw was actually able to use our Skyline system and our hardware and our software to be able to obtain their own beyond visual line of sight waiver. And then in North Dakota, we obtained our waiver up there. So we've got both of those in the last 6 months essentially, and are able to fly and created that repeatable system now. And we're starting to see activity with commercial customers that are looking at deploying the system for their own purposes and obtaining their own waivers. But we've created that essentially baseline for them to be able to begin building their operations off of. And it's not just the hardware and the software. We bring procedures, process, knowledge of the space. We are operators as well, so we really understand how to make it happen for people.
Okay, so you're saying that if I'm an operator and I want to take a little bit of risk and get into package delivery or something like that before the actual rules are out, and I want to go on a waiver, I mean, is that part of the services you provide that you're going to help me with all of that stuff, or do I just get the box and you leave it at the door? And
no, we're definitely there to be with
UPS
you.
Does,
you know, each enterprise kind of has their own mission, their own thing they're trying to achieve, and we recognize that they're going to need varying levels of help, right? A larger enterprise may have its full-own network operations center. They may be already doing hundreds of thousands of flights, so they're much more apt to just get the hardware and have some help installing it and the like. But another organization is going to need more support in building out the processes, and we can definitely step in and provide that service as well.
Okay, and I know you mentioned working with North Dakota, and I know North Dakota, it's they're the full meal deal, so they've got everything that we think the FAA is going to require for beyond visual line of sight stuff. So how do you interface with all of the other elements that we think the FAA is going to want for BV loss? The ground-based detect and avoid, the airborne detect and avoid, how you file corridors or don't file corridors depending on what they want. How do you fit into the big picture?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Skyline, right, is this it's the executive link manager, right? So it's making decisions about the command and control infrastructure and what's being selected by the aircraft. The other portion of that, though, is bringing in the detect and avoid information so that the operator has a full picture, a full common operating picture of what's happening. And Skyline is cloud-based, right? So via standard application programming interfaces, APIs, we can pull in other data, whether that's ADS-B data that comes from the network, or it's radar imagery data that comes in from from an uncooperative aircraft, if you will. Okay. There are other optical sensors or sound-based sensors out there as well. All that becomes something that can be integrated into Skyline.
Remote ID too, I'm assuming.
Remote ID is another one that we have, the broadcast modules, So all those become inputs, and they help with the detect and avoid case, essentially. So you have this assured command and control, and you have the detect and avoid all in one spot for the user.
Okay. All right. If you don't mind, we're going to switch things, and I know uAvionix has distinct opinions about remote ID and all that. Could you talk a little bit more about what you're doing in the remote ID space?
Sure. So we do have a remote ID broadcast module, right? There are essentially three ways to be able to fly legally after September. One is to actually have an aircraft where it's built in, and there are many manufacturers doing that today. The second is where we are, which is the broadcast module, and it's a very simple device. We know that this is a requirement that's coming, and that you kind of need to get beyond the requirement and be legal, right? And so for us, it's turn it on, allow it to acquire the signal, ready to go from a GPS perspective, and you start flying. So we try to make it as simple as possible. There's no configuration, there's no app required. It's literally turn it on, stick it on, and start flying.
Really? So I guess the date is 16th September, I think, is what we're going to do. So you've got a fully compliant thing.
Yes.
And you said stick it on. I don't think you're kidding. There's a two-sided piece of tape that goes to
it's 3M lock tape, right? So it's not going to go anywhere. But we recognize as well that an owner may have more than one drone, right? So you do have to register the serial number with the FAA, but you can go in and register to another drone, right? And it's very easy to be able to take it from one to the next, and that 3M lock tape is the simplest way to apply it.
Well, and I know, again, this is another thing that hasn't come out. They're talking about trusted remote ID to where, for example, you're working security for a nuclear plant, and remote ID itself is designed to be a very low bar to entry. So, you buy the drone and it's very simple and all this, but trusted remote ID puts some level of encryption. Are you guys interested in that market space?
Yeah, we'll have to see how it all forms up. I think certainly this show here at AUVSI, we've seen quite a few people come by and ask about it. There are other vendors producing remote ID modules as well, some producing the OEM versions too. And I think as we get closer to the September timeframe, we'll see what the demand is in the marketplace. Right, this is something that's new for everybody, including law enforcement or government operators, essentially be using a remote ID module, and also the receivers, right? So there's got to be both sides of that available, and I think as it matures, we'll continue to add things to the product as needed.
But you've got a pretty open system where you could do that if you want to. I mean, it must be a very frustrating job trying to predict what the FAA is going to do or whatever. I guess the FCC now gets a vote in it too, and there's hopefully going to be rules allowing C-band, as a command and control link. But if I heard you right, I think you really kind of don't care because you're so diverse that if FCC comes up with aviation protected frequency and C-band, great. If not, you got a solution for that?
So the multi-link that we deals in a variety of different frequencies. We obviously are a big proponent of the protected aviation C-band. because it's worldwide, right? And it's something that
Well, it makes your job.
yeah, it makes
for once.
and it's yeah for once. So we're very hopeful that the FCC will come through with that. But there are other paths available, right? Whether it be satellite communications or whether it's the use of LTE, the use of ISM, and so it's just a matter of making sure that you have multiple paths to the air, recognizing that the environments you're going to be flying in will determine what's needed for you. And we are actively involved in understanding what the making process is and commenting on that, and we'll continue to be doing that. And influencing it, right.
So what about international customers? What about our allies out there? I mean, I guess it's a little early because, Eurocontrol, UK, Civil Aviation, Transport Canada are in sort of the same boat. But how confident are you that you're transportable to, say, Canada or the United Kingdom?
Sure. So, I think the major difference between the U.S. and elsewhere in the world is that in the U.S. we have a very good ADS-B infrastructure on the ground, right?
That's
in particular. True. So when we're dealing with cooperative aircraft that are ADS-B here in the States, you have quite a bit of that detect and avoid element already available. When you go outside of the U.S., though, you have to start relying on base-based ADS-B 1090 in order to be able to get that signal.
Point, yeah.
And especially in Europe, right, there isn't a mandate. And so you have a variety of different technologies that are coming onto the market to try and be in a place to be able to identify where an aircraft is or where a drone is. And on the flip side, if I'm sending out a signal about that, I then have to receive it. And so there's a lot of competing technologies out there. We're well positioned, right? We have proven technology that works, that's based on standards. And just as we talked about earlier, we're a big one on standards. And so we're continuing to push that in Europe as well. And there's good voices over there that are singing a song with us, and we think that they'll continue to move forward.
Yeah, but you sound like you're one of those roulette players that covers everything. So, if you have to rely on space-based ADS-B and the latency may or may not be good enough, you can also input ground-based radar. I mean, I'm assuming a customer could put their own ADS-B, the receive antenna out, and you could take that. You don't care as long as it conforms to, works with your API. Is that a true statement?
That's true, and we actually make Pink Station 3, which is an ADS-B receiver.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and it's power over Ethernet, and you can buy one today and stand it up, and now you're receiving ADS-B for your option, right? And you connect that into Skyline, and away you go.
Does that work with remote ID? Do you have a...
It doesn't yet, but that's definitely on the works.
It should be pretty easy.
Yeah.
So what, again, I hate to sound like everything's up in the air, but everything's kind of up in the air. So what worries you most? Where do you think you've got the most risk in what you're doing? And let's just confine it to, C2 and what you're doing with Skylink and all that stuff. What keeps you up at night about what may or may not happen?
We're definitely, we're driving forward with beyond visual line of sight operation. What we're doing today is, as I mentioned, kind of by exception, right? You get a waiver for it. And as an industry, we're kind of stuck between scaling up and understanding what we're going to need to scale up. And I think that's probably the biggest risk for us right now. When we look at operators, right, they're buying things in one and twos as they figure out what's going to be needed, and they're kind of waiting for standards to be applied from the FAA. And then as manufacturers and service providers, right, we're feeding them ones and twos as a result. And we want to go from ones and twos to hundreds and really deploy in an efficient manner. And we can't really achieve the benefits of UAS operations or drone operations, whether it be delivery of packages or medical supplies, unless we kind of mature down that path. And one's agreement on that, it's just going to take some work to get there, and that's probably the biggest risk right now.
Well, I mean, how worried are you about catastrophic success? Because, I mean, let's be honest, you don't have a lot of competition in this space with people that really know what they're talking about, have systems that can get waivers now, and you've got an excellent chance of being compliant there. I mean, what if you the dog that catches the car?
Well, I would love that problem, right?
Yeah,
I think that would be a great one to have. We're well prepared. We have a great manufacturing team that can put product out. We have a great engineering team, great support team, and in the crewed aviation space, and that's one of the things we're known for is our customer support, and we'll apply that same level of effort in what we do in the uncrewed space. So I welcome that problem. I think the team's really looking forward to it as well, and we're well prepared to move forward.
Well, so I know that we've been talking a lot about North Dakota. I also know you work with the Choctaw Nation down there in Oklahoma, and they're kind of world famous for what they're doing, advanced air mobility, electronic vertical takeoff stuff. Are your solutions applicable in the advanced air mobility world? I mean,
certainly are. Yeah, because we took that aviation grade approach and we've gone through the necessary type certification efforts and the like, they're immediately applicable into that space. Obviously, there's a larger effort there from an STC perspective, right? The eVTOLs that are going to be carrying passengers for advanced air mobility are going through type certification now. It's a long process, and some of them are evaluating and using technology that we make, right? And so we'll be a part of that going forward. And many of the same things that we apply in the crewed aviation space, the tail beacon, the tail beacon X, right? Those transponders are immediately applicable in the eVTOL space as well.
So I guess if you look at it, the current state of advanced air mobility is a little bit easier for you because they're going to be manned aircraft and then optionally piloted and it sounds like you're that roulette player. You're betting on all three numbers that you're going to win.
Yeah, we have essentially 4 different verticals that we're working in there. You mentioned defense earlier, so that I'll treat that as one. There's this uncrewed space.
Yeah, we'll talk about that as we have time.
All right. There's the uncrewed space, which is what we're doing here at AUVSI. There's the crewed aviation space, and then the aviation data, right? And that's what when we get into receiving ADS-B and making sure that that's available to air traffic controllers and to operators, really to create an integrated airspace where everything is connected, right? And so if you think about it, creating safety, we're adding safety to it through connected airspace. And whether you're a drone operator or whether you're an eVTOL, advanced air mobility, or someone flying a Cessna 172, these technologies that we're bringing to bear are making safer skies.
Well, and that's a good point. I know we in the drone world take a lot of flack from general aviation, but you really are making the skies safer for everybody, to include general aviation.
Yep.
So good on you.
Yeah, it's we got started with the space of trying to put ADS-B on drones, and that didn't exactly pan out, and so we shifted to providing ADS-B on aircraft.
Don't get me started on that. That's another hour conversation.
Yeah.
I agree with you guys.
But it's been a great path, right? And we stay true to that mission of make safer skies.
Okay. And I think we've got time. How much time do we have left? 5 minutes. Okay, perfect. All right. So we got only 5 minutes. I could talk about this for an hour, but could you tell us what you're doing in the DoD space with your Mode 5 mini transponders?
Yeah.
First off, could you explain military versus civilian stuff?
Sure.
What the hell's a Mode 5?
Yeah, Mode 5, right, and IFF, all these acronyms that get thrown around. And think about it, you go back a few years, maybe 100 years or whatever, when aircraft were flying, I could tell who the enemy was because I could see the colors of the airplane, right? Right. Well, now things move faster the farther away, and so we had to come up with an electronic way of being able to do that. And when you're communicating electronically, you get the option to bring in encryption, right? Okay. And so that element is more than just a transponder, and really being able to combine together a typical Mode S transponder with that level of encryption is what we're doing in the space. And using our kind of knowledge and innovation of being able to miniaturize things, we took that Mode 5 identification friend or foe technology, made very, very small, so now we can put it onto small UAS. Why was that an issue? Well, because prior to that time, most of those types of transponders and Mode 5 IFF devices were quite large and heavy, and as we know...
Yeah,
right?
I had to put them on board the RC-135. They're that big.
Yep. Yeah.
Bigger than a bread box.
Bigger than
How big is yours?
Well, let's just say it'll fit in the palm of your hand.
Smaller than a bread box.
Yeah.
Okay.
And payload and performance of a UAS is highly dependent upon how much weight is there. So, size, weight, and power matters. And in this case, we created something that is right in line with what the requirements are for those type of operations, and it meets the requirements from a cryptographic perspective as well as from a transponder perspective, and it fits in the aircraft.
Well, I know your FAA TSO certification process must have helped you with this, but I know I've dealt a little bit with military IFF. There's a whole nother layer of certification that actually involves NATO to a certain extent.
It does.
Did you apply the same stuff and you're certified according to the DoD and NATO and all that kind of
stuff? Yeah, so
the
AIMS is the process there, and there are a lot of people that work on a regular basis to make sure that NATO countries can talk to one another essentially through that cryptographic knowledge. So we go through that same process. We have the AIM certified devices, the RT2087 ZPX, and that's what is is available for our customers to utilize.
Okay. So how do you think the war in Ukraine is impacting that kind of really small IFF transponder thing? Is it
well, from my
kind of
understanding,
making your case?
Yeah, it's we want to know what's flying and what's around us over there, and certainly there are some drones over there that are just going out with a one-way mission, obviously. But for those larger platforms that are being used in return, it's very important to know what's flying above you, whether it's friend or.
Well, and I know. All right, we got 1 more minute, so we're just going to talk about really quickly about current stuff. So I know that you're in with the Army and the future UAS community.
Yep.
You're also working with the Navy. I'm not as familiar with what you're doing with the Navy.
Similar things to the Mode 5 IFF, right? Just supporting platforms there and their ability to perform their missions, right? So we have a Mode 5 IFF device that meets their needs, and they can install it in their aircraft. So we'll continue to support them essentially through our partners.
Okay. Well, I know the Air Force has gone with much bigger drones, and they, for whatever reason, have the bigger than a bread box IFF in there. Are you applicable to the Air Force, particularly this new wave of drones, the autonomous collaborative platform or Royal Wingman? Do you think you got a space play in there?
Certainly, the capabilities we have, there's nothing that prevents it from being installed in those aircraft. And when you have a drone, irrespective of size, right? As I mentioned earlier, the weight and the power requirements really do matter. And if I can do something that makes room for other electronics or other warfare capabilities, there'll certainly be a place for it.
Or bombs, it's the Air Force.
Let it perform its mission, right?
Okay, so we're getting the hook. Is there anything that we missed? You got any final words that we haven't talked about?
No, I'd just say, there's one other thing with Skyline that's called True Sky. You should come by and check it out here at the show if you haven't had an opportunity already. But we are looking at how you can validate ADS-B, right? So we made these great ADS-B products. They're out there and they're being utilized, but there's still a question of, is it really correct, right? What's the integrity of it? And we talked about standards, we talked about integrity earlier. This is yet another step in that direction to make ADS-B trusted by the ATC and drone operators.
Yeah, well, I know we went through that with the Air Force, and boy, there's not much security when it comes to ADS-B. Very easy to spook.
Yep.
Good to see you're on top of that. All right, we're getting the final hook. Brit, fantastic talking
Thank you, sir.
to you. Best of luck. You've got a great product and a great company.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, folks.